"Do you remember me? Mafia boss?" Young girl returned groan and demanded her wedding night. The bass in the nightclub thumped against the ribcage, a rhythmic, artificial heartbeat that masked the darker pulse of the city. It was Christmas Eve, and the velvet lounge was bleeding gold and crimson light. The air smelled of expensive perfume, chilled vodka, and the metallic tang of money changing hands. It was a place where powerful men came to forget their sins, or perhaps to commit new ones. Dante Moretti sat in the VIP balcony, a glass of amber whiskey untouched in his hand. At 35, he ruled the city from the shadows. His suit was cut from Italian wool, sharp enough to draw blood, but his face was the real weapon. High cheekbones, a jawline that looked carved from granite, and a thin, jagged white scar running from his left temple to his jaw, a souvenir from a knife fight 10 years ago that should have killed him. He looked down at the revelry with the detached boredom of a predator who had already eaten. The security at the VIP entrance was impenetrable. 2 men the size of vending machines stood with arms crossed, their expressions promising violence to anyone who tried their luck. Then, she walked in. She did not weave through the crowd, she parted it. She was young, perhaps early 20s, wrapped in a tailored trench coat the color of midnight. Her hair was a cascade of dark waves, catching the strobe lights like obsidian. There was a terrifying stillness about her, a poise that did not belong in a chaotic nightclub. She stopped in front of the larger bouncer. "Marco, I am here to see Dante," she said. Her voice was not loud, yet it cut through the pounding music. Marco laughed, a low, rumbling sound. "Everyone wants to see the boss. Sweetheart, he's not taking visitors. Especially not on Christmas Eve. Go find a nice boy on the dance floor." She did not flinch. She did not blink. Slowly, deliberately, she reached into her coat pocket. Marco's hand twitched toward his holster, but she did not pull a gun. She pulled out a piece of paper. It was old. The edges were soft and fraying, the fold lines deep from years of being opened and closed. She unfolded it with delicate fingers and pressed it against Marco's chest. "Tell him," she said, her eyes lifting to the balcony where Dante sat in the shadows, "that his wife has come home." Dante watched the commotion from above. He saw Marco's face drain of color. The bouncer looked up, meeting Dante's gaze, and gave a hesitant nod. Dante frowned. He signaled for them to let her up, curiosity warring with a sudden, cold instinct that told him danger had just walked through his door. When she entered his private booth, the sound of the club faded behind the heavy, soundproof glass. Silence rushed in, thick and suffocating. She stood before him, hands deep in her pockets, up close. She was breathtaking. Her features were sharp, elegant, and hauntingly familiar, though he could not place them. Her eyes were large, dark, and filled with a storm of emotions, anger, fear, and a hunger that unsettled him. "Who are you?" Dante asked. His voice was gravel and smoke, cold enough to freeze the air between them. She stepped closer. "Do you remember me?" Dante narrowed his eyes. He scanned her face, searching for a threat, a lie, a memory. Then she tilted her head, a gesture of defiance that triggered a violent flash of recollection. 7 years ago. Rain slashed sideways against the windshield of his black SUV. He'd been 28. Ruthless. Climbing the ladder of the family business, they had raided a shipping container down at the docks, expecting drugs. Instead, they found people. She'd been huddled in the corner, wrapped in a dirty blanket, 15 years old, eyes wide with a terror that transcended screaming. She was being sold by the rival Russo family. Dante had killed 3 men that night to get to her. He remembered the weight of her shivering body as he carried her out into the rain. He remembered her gripping his lapel so hard her knuckles turned white. He could not put her in the system. The Russos had cops on their payroll. They would have found her and finished the job. So, he did the only thing that gave her legal untouchability in his world. He forged a marriage certificate, backdated it, and paid a corrupt judge $10,000 to seal it. She became Elena Moretti on paper. It was a shield, nothing more. He had sent her to a private boarding school in Switzerland, then a foster family in Vermont, buried under layers of anonymity and money. He had promised himself he would never see her again. It was the one good thing he had done in a life of crime. The memory washed over him, leaving him breathless. Dante stood up slowly, the whiskey glass trembling slightly before he set it down. "Elena, you remember," she whispered. "You are supposed to be in Vermont," he said, his voice rising. "You are supposed to be safe. Why are you here?" "I am 22. Dante, I am not a child anymore." She reached into her pocket again and slammed the paper onto the marble table between them. "And I am tired of hiding." Dante looked at the document. It was the marriage certificate. Dante, Moretti, and Elena Vance, the lie he had told to save her life. This, he gestured vaguely at the paper, was a formality, a firewall. "It means nothing." "It means everything," she countered, her voice steady. "It saved my life. You saved my life, but you also abandoned me." "I protected you," Dante roared, the sudden anger masking his shock. "Do you have any idea what my enemies would do if they knew you existed? If they knew the girl I stole from the Russos was still alive? I know exactly what they would do," Elena said. She unbuttoned her coat and let it slide off her shoulders. Underneath, she wore a sleek crimson dress that clung to her curves. Modest, but undeniably alluring. She looked nothing like the broken child he remembered. She looked like a queen. "I have spent 7 years looking over my shoulder. Dante, I graduated college a year early. I learned 3 languages. I learned how to shoot. I did everything you paid for. But I never forgot the man who carried me out of the rain." She took a step closer, invading his personal space. He could smell her scent, jasmine and winter air. "I am here to claim my husband," she stated. Dante stepped back, hitting the glass wall behind him. "There is no husband. Elena, there is only a criminal who did one decent deed. Go back to Vermont. I will wire you another $1 million. Buy a house. Find a nice man who does not have blood under his fingernails." "I do not want a nice man," she said softly. "I want the man who saved me." Dante stared at her, his chest heaving. He wanted to throw her out. He wanted to shake her, but mostly, he wanted to wrap his arms around her and breathe her in, and that terrified him more than any gun pointed at his head. "You cannot be here," he said, his voice straining. "It is not safe. I am staying," she declared. "It is Christmas. I have nowhere else to go, and legally, this is my city too." Dante ran a hand over his face, dragging his palm against the rough stubble. "My men. They will not understand." "Then tell them," she challenged. "Tell them your wife is home for the holidays." The drive to the Moretti estate was silent. Dante drove the armored sedan himself, his knuckles white on the leather steering wheel. Elena sat in the passenger seat, watching the city lights blur past. She did not look afraid. She looked victorious. When they pulled up to the wrought iron gates, the guards hesitated. Dante rolled down the window. "Open it," he barked. The gates swung open. As they parked in the circular driveway, the front doors of the mansion opened. His capos and household staff were waiting, alerted by Marco from the club. Dante stepped out, then walked around to open Elena's door. It was a reflex, a gentleman's habit he thought he had lost. She took his hand, her skin warm against his cold palm. They walked up the steps together. The silence from his men was deafening. "Listen to me." Dante addressed the assembly of hardened criminals and staff. "This is Elena. She is my guest. She is to be treated with the highest respect. Anyone who looks at her wrong answers to me." He could not bring himself to say wife. Not yet. It felt too dangerous, like painting a target on her back. Elena glanced at him, a flicker of disappointment in her eyes, but she held her head high. "Guest," she repeated softly, the word dripping with irony. Inside, the mansion was cold, a museum of expensive furniture and empty rooms. There was no Christmas tree, no decorations, just marble and shadows. "I will have the guest wing prepared," Dante said, refusing to meet her eyes. "No," Elena said. "I want to stay in the master wing." "Elena, I am your wife." "Dante, fake or not, I am not sleeping in the guest quarters like a stranger." Dante clenched his jaw. He was losing control of the situation, minute by minute. "Fine. There is a second bedroom in the east wing. You take that one." He marched away toward his study, needing distance, needing whiskey, needing to figure out how to get her out of the city before the wolves caught her scent. Hours later, the mansion was quiet. The storm outside had intensified, wind howling against the stone walls. Dante sat in his bedroom, sitting on the edge of his massive bed, staring at the fireplace. He had changed into loose dark trousers and a white shirt, unbuttoned at the top. He heard the door click open. He did not turn around. "I told you to stay in your room. Elena, I could not sleep," she said. Her voice was closer than he expected. Dante turned. The air left his lungs. She had showered and changed. She was wearing a silk robe the color of champagne, tied loosely at the waist. It was elegant, yet it hinted at the curves beneath in a way that made his mouth go dry. Her hair was damp, falling in dark ribbons over her shoulders. She looked soft, touchable, and incredibly dangerous to his resolve. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice rough. She walked across the Persian rug, her bare feet silent. She stopped between his spread knees, standing so close he could feel the heat radiating from her body. "I used to dream about this house," she whispered. "When I was in the foster home, when I was lonely, I would close my eyes and imagine I was here. With you." "You were imagining a savior," Dante said, looking up at her. "Not a man. You do not know me. Elena, you know a shadow." "I know you," she insisted. She reached out, her fingers trembling slightly, and touched the scar on his face. Dante flinched. No one touched him there. It was a reminder of his brutality, but her touch was feather-light, reverent. She traced the jagged white line from his temple to his jaw. "I know you took a knife for someone you barely knew," she murmured. "I took a knife because I was slow," he corrected harshly. "Because I was a killer doing a job." "No," she shook her head. "You are a good man. Dante, you buried yourself under this armor, but I see you." She sat on his lap. Dante froze. Every muscle in his body went rigid. She settled against him, her weight light, her legs draping over his thigh. It was an innocent position that felt incredibly erotic. "Elena, get up," he warned, but his hands did not push her away. Instead, they hovered at her waist, terrified to touch, terrified to let go. "Do you remember what you said to me that night?" she asked, her voice dropping to a husky whisper. "Before you put me in the car to send me away." Dante closed his eyes. He remembered every word. "You are mine now. Elena, no one will ever hurt you again." "I said a lot of things," he deflected. "You said I belonged to you." She said. She leaned in, her forehead resting against his. "I believed you. I waited for you. 7 years. Dante, I kept myself for you." The confession hit him like a physical blow. She had waited, while he had whored around, drank, and killed. She had been waiting for a phantom husband to come claim her. "You wasted your time," he groaned. "Prove it," she challenged. She tilted her chin and brushed her lips against his. It was a soft, tentative contact, a question asked in the language of breath and skin. Dante tried to remain stone. He tried to be the cold boss, the guardian. But the moment her lips parted, tasting of mint and longing, his resistance shattered. He groaned low in his throat and his hands clamped onto her waist, pulling her flush against him. He kissed her back. It was not gentle. It was a starving man finally tasting bread. It was slow, deep, and breathless. He devoured her, his tongue sweeping into her mouth, tasting her youth and her fire. Elena made a soft sound of surrender, her hands tangling in his dark hair, pulling him closer. For a moment, there was no Mafia, no danger, no past. There was only the heat of her body and the desperate need to consume her. Dante's hand slid up her back, feeling the silk, feeling the warmth of her skin beneath it. He wanted to tear the robe off. He wanted to lay her back on the bed and claim the wife he had accidentally acquired. The realization snapped him back to reality like a bucket of ice water. He tore his mouth away from hers, breathing hard, his chest heaving. He pushed her back, not violently, but firmly. "No," he gasped. Elena looked at him, her lips swollen, her eyes dazed and heavy with desire. "Dante?" He stood up abruptly, dumping her off his lap and onto the mattress. He retreated to the fireplace, turning his back to her, his hands gripping the mantelpiece until his knuckles cracked. "Get out," he commanded, his voice shaking. "Dante, please." "I said get out," he shouted, spinning around. His eyes were wild. "Look at me. Elena, I am a monster. I have blood on these hands. I have enemies who would skin you alive just to get to me. You think this is a fairy tale? This is a death sentence." He pointed a shaking finger at the door. "Go to your room. Lock the door. Tomorrow morning. You're getting on a plane, even if I have to tie you to the seat." Elena stood up slowly. She pulled her robe tighter around herself. She did not cry. The hurt was there, plain on her face. But beneath it was steel. "You can push me away all you want, Dante," she said, her voice steady. "But you kissed me back. You felt it." She turned and walked out of the room, closing the heavy oak door with a quiet click. Dante sank onto the floor in front of the fire, burying his face in his hands. He could still taste her. And God help him, he wanted more. Outside the mansion, the snow was falling harder, blanketing the estate in silence. The high stone walls and security cameras made it a fortress, but every fortress has a blind spot. A black sedan was parked deep in the tree line. Half a mile down the road, the engine was off, the windows tinted, inside. A man lowered a pair of high-powered binoculars. He had seen the arrival. He had seen the woman in the red dress. He picked up a burner phone and dialed a number. It rang once. "Speak!" A voice answered on the other end. "She has returned," the watcher said. His voice was devoid of emotion. "The girl from the warehouse. She's with Moretti." There was a long silence on the line, followed by a dark chuckle. "So, the little bird flew back to the cage," the voice on the other end said. "Excellent. Moretti has a weakness now, a heart. What are the orders?" "Watch her. Wait for the opportunity. He thinks he buried the past, but the past is hungry." The voice paused, savoring the malice. "He won't survive this. Christmas is going to be very red this year." The line went dead. The watcher started the engine, the car purring to life like a sleeping beast, and disappeared into the snowy night. The morning light filtered through the heavy velvet drapes of the library, casting long, gray shadows across the room. The air tasted of stale tobacco and high-tension anxiety. Dante Moretti sat behind his mahogany desk, his face a mask of stone, though his eyes betrayed a sleepless night. Across from him sat Silvio, his consigliere and oldest friend, and Arthur Penwright, the family's lead attorney. Arthur looked pale, wiping sweat from his forehead with a silk handkerchief despite the chill in the room. "It is a legal nightmare." "Dante," Arthur said, his voice trembling slightly. "The marriage certificate is valid. We made sure of that 7 years ago because we needed it to be ironclad to keep her out of the foster system's database. But now, if the feds dig into your personal assets, they find her. If they find her, they find a link to the Russo trafficking case from years ago. It reopens everything." Silvio leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Forget the law, Dante. Think about the streets. You have a wife. A wife is a weakness. The moment the other families catch wind that there is a civilian living in this house, a civilian you are legally bound to, they will not see a girl. They will see a target painted on your chest." Dante rubbed his temples. The headache that had started the moment Elena walked into the nightclub had bloomed into a migraine. "She is not staying," Dante said, his voice low. "I'm sending her away today." "She does not look like someone who wants to leave," Silvio noted dryly. "Marco told me she walked into the club like she owned the place. And the men downstairs? They are whispering. They say she has your eyes." "She does not have my eyes," Dante snapped. "She has the eyes of a girl who survived hell, and I was stupid enough to think I could save her by signing a piece of paper." "You did save her," Silvio said softly, "but now you have to save yourself. Put her on a plane. Dante, annul the marriage, pay her off." Dante slammed his hand on the desk, making the coffee cups rattle. "Do not talk about paying her off like she is some cheap fling. She is—" He stopped, the word wife dying in his throat. "She is my responsibility." He dismissed them with a wave of his hand. He needed air. He needed silence. Dante walked out of the study, intending to head to the gym to punch something until his knuckles bled. Instead, he stopped dead in the hallway. Elena was there. She was leaning against the wall, bathed in the soft morning light coming from the high windows. She was not wearing the red dress from the night before. She was wearing his shirt. It was a white dress shirt he had discarded on a chair, and it swallowed her frame. The sleeves were rolled up to her elbows, and the hem hit her, mid-thigh, leaving her long, pale legs bare. It was a look of casual, domestic intimacy that hit Dante in the chest like a sledgehammer. It was a claim. She was wearing his clothes, in his house, looking at him with eyes that saw right through his armor. "You look terrible," she said softly. "I did not sleep," Dante replied, his voice rough. "Silvio and the lawyer just left. We are making arrangements for your travel." Elena pushed off the wall and walked toward him. She moved with a feline grace, silent and deliberate. "I told you last night, Dante, I am not going anywhere." "You do not understand this life, Elena," he warned, stepping back as she advanced. "You see the money, the suits, the power. You do not see the blood. You do not see the rot. I was 15 when I was sold to a gang," Elena said, her voice devoid of self-pity. "Hard as diamond. I lived in a shipping container for 3 days before you found me. Do not tell me I do not know about the rot. I know exactly what monsters look like, and I know what you look like." She stopped inches from him. She reached out and took his hand, her fingers cool against his fever-hot skin. "I know you wake up screaming sometimes," she whispered. "I know you drink the expensive whiskey not because you like the taste, but because it burns the memories away. I know you think you are poisonous." "Dante." Dante stared at her, stunned. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because I watched you," she said, 7 years ago, in the safe house, before you sent me away. I watched you when you thought I was asleep. I saw the way you looked at the door, making sure it was locked. I saw the sadness in your eyes when you looked at me." She stepped closer, placing his hand on her waist. The fabric of his own shirt was the only thing separating his palm from her skin. "I never stopped loving you," she confessed. "Not for one day. I went to school. I made friends. I pretended to be normal. But every night, I prayed for the man who saved me. I am tired of pretending I do not belong to you." Dante's resolve was cracking. The stone walls he had built around his heart were turning to dust under her gaze. "Elena, I am 12 years older than you. I am damaged goods. I cannot give you a normal life. I do not want normal," she said fiercely. "I want you." She reached up and unbuttoned the top of his black shirt, exposing the ink that covered his chest. Dante stiffened, but he did not stop her. Her fingers traced the black lines of the dragon that curled over his heart, the scars from bullets and knives that mapped his history of violence. "I remember the night you found me," she murmured, her eyes following her fingers. "You picked me up. You held me so tight, but you were shaking. You were terrified of hurting me. You held me like I was made of glass." She looked up, her dark eyes burning with a fire that matched his own suppressed desire. "You held me to protect me, not to touch me. You treated me like a child who needed saving." She guided his hand from her waist, sliding it up under the oversized shirt, pressing his palm flat against the bare, warm skin of her lower back. The contact sent a shockwave through him that nearly brought him to his knees. "I'm not a child anymore, Dante," she breathed. "And I do not want to be protected right now. I want to be touched." Dante made a low, guttural sound, a sound of defeat and starving need. "Elena, touch me," she commanded softly. "Claim your wife." The last thread of his restraint snapped. Dante swept her up into his arms, her legs instantly wrapping around his waist, and carried her down the hall to his bedroom. He kicked the door shut behind them, the sound echoing like a gunshot, sealing them in. He set her down on the edge of the bed, the mattress dipping under her weight. He stood between her knees, breathing hard, his hands framing her face. He looked at her as if memorizing her, terrified that she might disappear if he blinked. "If I start this," he rasped, his thumbs tracing her cheekbones. "I cannot stop. Do you understand? If I touch you, There is no going back. You are mine, in every way. I was always yours, she answered. Dante kissed her. It was not the desperate, angry kiss of the night before. This was slow. It was heavy with 7 years of silence. He kissed her like a vow. His lips moved over hers with a terrifying tenderness, tasting her, learning the shape of her mouth. Elena sighed into his mouth, her hands sliding into his hair, pulling him closer. She needed this proximity, this weight. She needed to feel the reality of him to banish the ghosts of her past. He pulled back to look at her, his eyes dark with emotion. Slowly, he unbuttoned the shirt she was wearing. It slid off her shoulders, pooling on the floor. She sat before him, vulnerable and beautiful, the morning light turning her skin to gold. Dante knelt before her. He ran his large, rough hands down her arms, over her ribs, worshipping her with his touch. He treated her body not as an object of conquest, but as a holy sight. He kissed the hollow of her throat, the curve of her shoulder, his stubble grazing her soft skin, making her shiver. "You are so beautiful," he whispered against her skin, his voice thick. "It hurts to look at you." "Then close your eyes," she whispered back, "and feel me." He laid her back against the pillows. The act that followed was a slow unraveling. It was a conversation without words, spoken in the language of friction and heat. Dante moved with a restrained power, terrified of his own strength. But Elena met him with a fierce, demanding passion. She did not want his gentleness alone. She wanted his fire. When they finally joined, it was a moment of absolute, shattering connection. Elena gasped, arching into him, tears springing to her eyes, not from pain, but from the overwhelming relief of finally coming home. Dante buried his face in her neck, groaning her name like a prayer. They moved together in a slow, rhythmic cadence, the world outside fading until there was nothing left but the two of them. Every touch was a promise kept, every breath a shared secret. It was raw, emotional, and deeply human. Afterward, they lay tangled in the sheets, limbs heavy and intertwined. The room was silent save for their synchronized breathing. Dante pulled the duvet up over her shoulders, tucking her in with an almost obsessive care. He wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her back against his chest, holding her tightly. "Stay," he whispered into her hair, his voice barely audible, as if he was afraid the universe might hear him and punish him for his happiness. "I'm not going anywhere," she murmured, sleep already pulling her under. The reality of daylight was less forgiving. Dante woke first. The clock on the bedside table read 8 in the morning. For a split second, he felt a profound sense of peace, until the weight of who he was came crashing back down. He looked at Elena sleeping beside him, her dark hair fanned out on the white pillow, looking innocent and fragile. Panic set in, cold and sharp. What have I done? He had crossed the line. He had tied her to him in the most irrevocable way possible. Now, she wasn't just a legal liability. She was his heart, beating outside of his chest, vulnerable to every bullet and knife in the city. He slipped out of bed silently, dressed quickly in his suit, his armor, and left the room without waking her. When Elena walked into the kitchen an hour later, she found Dante standing by the window, drinking black coffee, his back to the room. He was fully dressed, his posture rigid. "Good morning," she said cheerfully. She moved to the stove, where a bewildered chef was watching her. "I will handle the eggs, Marco, thank you." Dante turned. His face was closed off again, the cold mask back in place. "You should not be cooking. We have staff for that." "I like cooking," Elena said, cracking an egg into a pan with practiced ease. "It makes this place feel like a home, not a mausoleum." "Elena," Dante started, his tone formal. "About last night." She turned to face him, spatula in hand, her expression unimpressed. "If you are about to apologize or tell me it was a mistake, save your breath. I know you. Dante, I know you are scared, but I am making breakfast, and I am staying. So sit down and drink your coffee." Dante opened his mouth to argue, then snapped it shut. He stared at her. She was domestic, stubborn, and utterly unafraid of him. A reluctant admiration sparked in his chest. He sat down. Over the next 2 days, the atmosphere in the Moretti estate shifted. Elena did not hide in her room. She walked the halls with her head held high. She introduced herself to the maids, learning their names and asking about their families, something Dante had never done in 10 years. She went to the garage and spoke to the mechanics. She found the younger guards playing cards in the break room and charmed them with stories of her time in the foster system, making them laugh. The men, who had initially viewed her as a nuisance or a liability, began to change their tune. They watched her with respect. She was not a pampered princess. She had grit. She looked them in the eye. She did not flinch when she saw their guns. She is good for the house. Boss. Marco, the head of security, told Dante one afternoon as they watched her walking in the garden, "The place feels lighter." "Lighter makes us soft," Dante grumbled, but his eyes followed her with a hunger he could not suppress. The peace shattered on the 3rd day. It was late afternoon. The winter sun was setting, painting the sky in bruises of purple and orange. Elena was in the garden. Cutting holly branches for a centerpiece she insisted on making for the dining table. Dante was watching her from the balcony above, a cigarette burning forgotten in his hand. A sharp crack echoed through the air. Dante flinched, his instincts screaming before his brain registered the sound. At the main gate, a cloud of dust erupted from the stone pillar. A motorcycle engine roared in the distance, fading fast. "Get down!" Dante roared, vaulting over the balcony railing and dropping to the grass below. A dangerous 20-foot drop he took without thinking. He sprinted toward Elena. She was already crouching behind a stone fountain, her face pale but her eyes alert. She held the gardening shears like a dagger. "Are you hit?" Dante demanded, grabbing her shoulders, his hands frantically checking her for blood. "No," she gasped. "I am fine. It came from the road." Marco and 5 other guards were already running toward the gate, guns drawn. Dante dragged Elena back inside the house, his grip bruising. He shoved her into the hallway, his body shielding hers. "Lock down the estate," he shouted into his radio. "Nobody in or out." 10 minutes later, Marco walked into the study where Dante was pacing like a caged tiger. Elena sat on the leather sofa, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Marco placed a plastic bag on the desk. Inside was a brick wrapped in paper, which had been thrown over the gate immediately following the shot. "There is a message," Marco said grimly. Dante ripped the bag open. He unfolded the paper. The handwriting was jagged, hasty. "Return her or die. We are coming for what is ours." Dante stared at the note. The blood rushed in his ears. It was them. The remnants of the trafficking ring, the people who had hurt her. They knew. He crumpled the note in his fist. "Double the guard," he ordered, his voice lethal. "Snipers on the roof. I want patrols every 10 minutes. If a squirrel crosses the perimeter, I want to know about it." "Dante." Elena stood up. "They are not going to stop. They know I am here." "I know, Dante snarled. "I want to face them," she said. "I am not a victim anymore. I can shoot. I can help." "No." Dante spun on her, his fury exploding. "You are not going anywhere near them. You are staying in this house, in the safe room, until I hunt every last one of them down and put them in the ground." "I am your wife," she shouted back, stepping toward him. "I'm supposed to be your partner. Do not lock me away like a prisoner." Dante grabbed her arms, pulling her close, his face inches from hers. His eyes were wide, filled with a terror that stopped her cold. "You think this is about pride?" he hissed, his voice shaking. "You think this is about control? Elena, if you die, if they touch you again—" He choked on the words. He let go of her arms and grabbed her face, his thumbs digging into her jaw. "If you die," he whispered, the truth ripping out of him. "There is nothing left of me. I will burn this city to ash. I will kill everyone. I will become the monster you think I am not." Elena stared at him, seeing the raw, bleeding wound of his love for her. It was terrifying and overwhelming. "Dante," she whispered. "You stay inside," he commanded, his voice breaking. "Because if I lose you, I lose everything." He turned and stormed out of the room, leaving her standing alone in the silence. the echo of his fear vibrating in the air. She looked at the crumpled note on the desk. She realized then that this was not just a fight for survival. It was a fight for his soul, and she knew, with absolute certainty, that she could not win it by hiding in a safe room. Whispers in the underworld travel faster than bullets, and they are often just as deadly. By the time the snow had settled on the streets of the city, the news had reached every backroom poker game, every corrupt precinct, and every rival syndicate's headquarters. Dante Moretti had a wife. They called her the Mafia Bride, with a mixture of derision and dark curiosity. To some, she was a weakness, a soft underbelly exposed on a man who was supposed to be made of iron. To others, she was a mystery. The Russo family, the very snakes who had trafficked her 7 years ago, smelled blood in the water. They did not know her name was Elena yet, but they knew she was back, and they knew she was the key to breaking the king of the city. Dante felt the shift in the air. He moved through his days with a coiled tension, waiting for the hammer to fall. But the source of his greatest anxiety was not the assassins sharpening their knives in the dark. It was the woman sleeping down the hall. He found her in the unlikeliest of places. It was early evening. Dante had gone to his private gym, a converted industrial space on the estate grounds, intending to work through his frustration on the heavy bag. He stopped in the doorway, the towel in his hand, forgotten. Elena was there. She was wearing tight black leggings and a sports bra that left her midriff bare, her skin glistening with a sheen of sweat. Her hands were wrapped in professional tape. She was circling the heavy bag with a focus that was almost frightening. Thwack, thwack, hiss. She threw a jab-cross combination, her form perfect, her hips rotating to put real power behind the blow. Dante watched, paralyzed by a collision of lust and shock. He remembered a trembling 15-year-old girl who flinched at loud noises. He was looking at a woman who moved like a fighter. The muscles in her back shifted as she struck the bag again, a savage right hook that made the heavy leather swing violently. She stopped, breathing hard, wiping her forehead with her forearm. She sensed him before she saw him. She turned, her chest heaving, her dark eyes locking onto his. "You are dropping your left hand when you hook," Dante said, his voice rougher than he intended. Elena straightened, not looking the least bit embarrassed to be caught. "I am self-taught. I took boxing classes at the university gym to stop feeling afraid." Dante walked into the room, the scent of leather and sweat filling his nose. He circled her slowly. "Classes are different from a street fight. Elena, the bag does not hit back." "Then hit me," she challenged, raising her fists. Dante stopped in front of her. The air between them crackled. He looked at her flushed face, the determination in her jaw, and he felt a surge of admiration so strong it terrified him. She was beautiful, yes, but she was also fierce. "I do not hit women," Dante said quietly, "especially not my wife." He reached out, correcting her stance, his large hands adjusting her elbows, his fingers lingering on her warm skin. "Keep your guard up. Protect your chin. Always assume the other person has a knife." For a moment, it wasn't training. It was intimacy. He stood behind her, his chest brushing her back, his hands on her forearms, guiding her movement. The heat radiating from her was intoxicating. "I am not weak anymore." "Dante," she whispered, leaning back slightly against him. "I know," he murmured, his lips brushing her ear. "That is what scares me." Later that night, Dante sat on the terrace with Silvio, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. A bottle of wine sat between them, half empty. "She is dangerous," Dante confessed, staring into the abyss of the night. "Not because she is a liability, Silvio, but because she makes me want to live. And men like us, we do not get to live, we get to survive until we don't." Silvio swirled his glass. "You are terrified of loving her." "Everyone I have ever loved is in the ground," Dante said, his voice devoid of emotion. "My parents, my brother. If I love her, I sign her death warrant. It is a curse." "Maybe," Silvio shrugged, "or maybe she is the one thing that will make you fight hard enough to actually win this war." Dante did not answer. He could not tell Silvio that he had already lost the war. He had lost it the moment he kissed her. Elena felt the walls of the mansion closing in on her. The security was stifling. Every time she walked near a window, a guard shadowed her. She knew Dante was doing it to keep her alive, but to her, it felt like the cage she had escaped 7 years ago. She needed to do something real. She needed to reclaim a piece of her agency. Using an old burner phone she had hidden in her luggage, a habit from her years of looking over her shoulder, she made a call. She arranged for a delivery of winter coats, toys, and a substantial cash donation to the St. Jude's foster home, the place where Dante had first hidden her. It was a reckless, sentimental gesture, a need to close a loop. She knew Dante would forbid her from going, so she didn't tell him. She waited until the shift changed at 2 in the afternoon. She slipped into the back seat of a laundry delivery van exiting the estate, bribing the driver with a diamond earring and a desperate plea. He was a young kid, terrified of Dante, but melted by her charm and the promise that she would be back before anyone noticed. It worked. She got out 3 blocks away from the foster home and hailed a cab. She arrived at the home with a bouquet of white lilies. She spent an hour there, anonymously leaving the donations, watching the children play from a distance. Feeling a bittersweet ache in her chest, it was closed. She felt lighter, stronger. But as she walked toward the parking lot to call a cab back, the hair on the back of her neck stood up. The parking lot was deserted, surrounded by high chain-link fences. 2 black sedans blocked the exit. Elena froze. 3 men stepped out. They were not Dante's men. They wore cheap leather jackets and carried themselves with the sloppy arrogance of hired thugs. Well, the leader grinned, revealing a gold tooth. The little bird wandered far from the nest. Elena's heart slammed against her ribs. She reached into her purse, her fingers wrapping around the cold steel of the compact pistol she had stolen from Dante's armory that morning. "Stay back," she ordered. Her voice trembled, betraying her bravado. "Put the toy away, sweetheart." The man laughed, stepping closer. "The boss wants to see you. He says you have some catching up to do." Elena drew the gun. She leveled it at them, but her hand was shaking violently. The training in the gym, the heavy bag, it all vanished in the face of real, breathing malice. These were the monsters from her nightmares. "I said back off," she screamed. The men spread out, circling her like wolves. "She's shaking," one of them mocked. "Grab her!" They lunged. A roar of an engine tore through the air. A matte black sports car smashed through the chain-link fence, metal screeching against metal. It drifted sideways, tires smoking, and screeched to a halt between Elena and the attackers. The door flew open. Dante did not speak. He did not hesitate. He stepped out of the car, his face a mask of pure, concentrated rage. He raised his weapon, a heavy-caliber handgun, and fired. Bang, bang. 2 of the attackers dropped instantly, clutching their legs, screaming as bones shattered. The third man, the leader, scrambled back, eyes wide with terror. "Moretti!" he gasped. Dante walked toward him, not running, just a steady, unstoppable force of death. He pistol-whipped the man across the face, sending him sprawling to the asphalt. Dante stood over him. The barrel of his gun pressed to the man's forehead. "Tell your master," Dante snarled, his voice low and terrifying, "that if he ever looks at her again, I will cut his eyes out." He kicked the man in the ribs, cracking them, and turned to Elena. She was still standing there, the gun in her hand, her chest heaving. She looked at him, expecting comfort. "Get in the car," Dante roared. He didn't wait. He grabbed her arm, his grip painful, and shoved her into the passenger seat. He slammed the door, marched to the driver's side, and peeled out of the parking lot, leaving the groaning men in the rearview mirror. The ride back was silent and suffused with fury. Dante drove like a madman, weaving through traffic, his knuckles white on the wheel. "What were you thinking?" he finally exploded, slamming his hand against the dashboard. "You could have been killed. You could have been taken. Do you have any idea what they would have done to you?" "I wanted to do something good," Elena shouted back, tears streaming down her face. "I wanted to visit the home. I'm sick of being locked up." "You are locked up because there are wolves at the door. Elena, I had a gun. I stood my ground." "You were shaking," Dante yelled, glancing at her with wild eyes. I saw you. You were terrified. You are not a soldier. Elena, you are a civilian. You are my wife. You are supposed to be safe." "I wanted to prove I wasn't weak anymore," she screamed, her voice breaking into a sob. "I wanted to prove I was worthy of you." Dante slammed on the brakes. The car skidded to a halt on the shoulder of the deserted highway. He turned to her. The anger in his eyes collided with the desperation in hers. "Worthy?" he choked out. "You think you need to hold a gun to be worthy of me? I am the one who is unworthy. Elena, I am the one drowning in blood." He reached for her. The argument dissolved into chaos. Elena lunged across the center console, grabbing the lapels of his coat. Dante met her halfway. They kissed with a violence that mirrored the danger they had just escaped. It was a clash of teeth and tongues, a desperate affirmation of life. Elena's hands tangled in his hair, pulling him closer, needing to feel the solid reality of him. Dante's hands gripped her waist, tight enough to leave bruises, anchoring her to the earth. "I thought I lost you," he groaned against her mouth. "I saw them moving on you, and I stopped breathing. I'm here," she sobbed, kissing his jaw, his neck, his scar. "I'm here. Dante." They stayed like that for a long time, huddled together in the cooling car, the adrenaline fading into a bone-deep exhaustion. When they returned to the mansion, the storm had not passed. It had moved inside. Dante dismissed the guards with a sharp look. He took Elena's hand and led her up the stairs, not stopping until they were in his bedroom. He locked the door. The silence of the room was heavy. Elena stood by the bed, still trembling, her coat discarded on the floor. Dante paced the room, running his hands through his hair, his composure shattered. "Why?" he asked, his voice shaking. He stopped and looked at her, his eyes red-rimmed. "Why do you keep coming back to me? Why do you fight so hard for a man who brings nothing but death to your doorstep? You saw what happened today." "That is my life. Elena, violence, fear, why do you want this?" Elena walked toward him. She looked at the man who terrified the entire city, and she saw only the boy who had been forced to grow up too fast. "Because you are the only one," she said, her voice steady now. She stopped in front of him, placing her hands on his chest, over his racing heart. "The only one?" "What?" Dante whispered. "You're the only one who ever saw me as more than broken," she said. "Everyone else saw a victim. The social workers saw a case file. The world saw damaged goods. But you, 7 years ago, you looked at me and you saw a person. You gave me a name. You gave me a life. You saved me. Dante, not just from them. You saved me from believing I was worthless." Dante let out a shuddering breath. He looked at her with a raw, naked vulnerability. "You are everything," he rasped. "You are the only clean thing I have ever touched." He kissed her then, and it was different from the car. It was desperate, yes, but it was also reverent. He needed to be close to her, to erase the image of those men circling her. They fell onto the bed together, a tangle of limbs and longing. The lovemaking that followed was intense and consuming. It was a reclaiming. Dante moved over her with a fierce possession, his hands mapping every inch of her body as if checking for invisible wounds. "Mine," he whispered against her skin, his voice a low growl. "You are mine. I will burn the world before I let them take you." Elena held him just as tightly, wrapping her legs around him, pulling him into the shelter of her body. She met his intensity with her own, matching his rhythm, demanding as much as she gave. It was a physical conversation of survival. They were two people standing on the edge of a cliff, clinging to each other to keep from falling. When the crest came, it left them both shattered and breathless, clinging to each other in the tangled sheets. Dante buried his face in her neck, his breathing harsh, his arms locked around her like iron bands. Elena stroked his hair, tears slipping silently from her eyes. They were alive. They were together. But the shadow of the parking lot hung over them. A sharp knock on the door broke the spell. Dante froze. His muscles tensed instantly, the lover vanishing, the boss returning. He pulled away from Elena, pressing a kiss to her forehead before sitting up. He reached for his discarded shirt. "What is it?" he called out, his voice hard. "It is Silvio." The voice came through the heavy wood. "We have a problem. Dante, a big one." Dante dressed quickly. He opened the door a crack, shielding Elena from view. Silvio stood in the hallway, his face pale in the dim light. He held a tablet in his hand. "The Russo family," Silvio said, his voice grim. "They didn't just send thugs to the foster home. That was a probe. They have gone public in the underworld." "Speak plain, Silvio," Dante commanded. Silvio turned the tablet around. It displayed a message circulating on the encrypted networks used by the crime families. It was a bounty, a massive sum of money. "They have placed a contract," Silvio said. $10 million, dead or alive." Dante looked at the screen. His blood ran cold. "For me?" Dante asked. Silvio shook his head slowly. "No. $5 million for you." He pointed to the second name on the list. "And $5 million for her." Dante stared at the screen. They had put a price on Elena's head. She wasn't just a bystander anymore. She was a combatant in their eyes, a target. He closed the door and leaned his forehead against the wood. The war had officially begun, and he had no idea how he was going to keep her alive. The jet was waiting on the private airstrip. Its engines were already idling, a low whine that cut through the icy morning air like a persistent headache. On Dante's desk, a single envelope lay flat against the dark mahogany. It contained a passport with a new name, a bank account number with enough zeros to last 3 lifetimes, and a one-way ticket to a remote island in the South Pacific where the extradition laws were non-existent. Dante stood by the window, watching the gray sky threaten more snow. He felt old. The weight of the bounty, $5 million on his head, $5 million on hers, pressed down on his shoulders like a physical load. "The car is ready," Dante said, not turning around when he heard the door open. "Marco will drive you to the airfield. You will be in the air within the hour." Silence answered him. He turned. Elena stood in the doorway. She was not wearing the travel clothes the maid had laid out for her. She was wearing a black pencil skirt and a sharp, tailored blazer that cinched at her waist. She looked like a CEO, or perhaps a queen preparing for a coronation. She looked nothing like a woman running for her life. "I'm not going," she said. Dante closed his eyes, a muscle feathering in his jaw. "We are not having this debate again. Elena, the contract is live. Every low-level shooter in the city is looking for you. I cannot watch every shadow while I'm trying to fight a war." "Then do not watch the shadows," she countered, walking further into the room. She picked up the envelope from the desk and tore it in half. The sound of the ripping paper was violently loud in the quiet room. She dropped the pieces into the wastebasket. "Watch me." "You are being reckless," Dante snapped, his voice rising. "This is not a game. If they catch you, if I leave—" She interrupted, her voice steady. "They win. They want to isolate you. They want to make you weak by taking away the thing you are distracted by. If I run, I am just the victim again. I am the girl in the shipping container." She walked around the desk and stood toe-to-toe with him. She had to crane her neck to look him in the eye, but she felt 10 feet tall. "I am Elena Moretti," she declared. "I am the wife of the Dawn, and I am staying right here, by your side." Dante looked down at her, frustration warring with a fierce, blinding pride. He wanted to shake her. He wanted to kiss her. "You have no idea what you are asking for. Today is the council meeting. The heads of the neutral families. I have to convince them not to side with the Russos. It will be a room full of sharks." "Good," Elena said, smoothing the lapels of his jacket. "Then bring a shark of your own." The boardroom of the Moretti crime family was located in the back of an imported Italian olive oil warehouse. The air smelled of dust, brine, and expensive cigars. 12 men sat around the long oak table. These were the captains, the lieutenants, and the representatives of the smaller gangs who operated in the city's periphery. The atmosphere was tense. The news of the bounty had made everyone jittery. Loyalty was expensive, and $10 million was a lot of money. When the doors opened, the conversation died instantly. Dante walked in first, his presence sucking the oxygen out of the room. He was dressed in black, his face a thundercloud, but it was the person following him that made the men sit up straighter. Elena walked in. She kept her chin high, her hands clasped loosely in front of her. She did not look at the floor, she looked at the men, meeting their gazes one by one. She took the empty seat to Dante's right, the seat reserved for the consigliere, though Silvio willingly stood against the wall to allow it. A murmur rippled through the room. So it is true. A voice rasped from the end of the table. It was Capo Vinny, the butcher Morello, a man whose loyalty had always been transactional. He leaned back, chewing on a toothpick, his eyes raking over Elena with open disrespect. "The rumors said you brought a pet home. Dante," Vinny sneered. "I did not know we were bringing bedroom warmers to the business table." The room went deadly silent. Silvio stiffened against the wall, his hand drifting toward his jacket. Dante did not move. He sat perfectly still, his hands resting on the table. "Careful." "Vinny." "Careful of what?" Vinny laughed, looking around for support from the other captains. "Come on, boss. We all know who she is. The Russo scrap, damaged goods from the docks. You think she belongs here? She belongs on a street corner, not at the high table." Elena did not flinch. She stared at Vinny, her expression unreadable. But Dante moved. It happened so fast that half the room missed it. Dante launched himself out of his chair. He moved with the terrifying speed of a striking cobra. He crossed the distance to Vinny in 2 strides. He grabbed the capo by the back of his greasy hair and slammed his face into the solid oak table. Crack. The sound of breaking bones echoed like a gunshot. Vinny screamed, blood instantly spraying across the polished wood. Dante did not let go. He hauled Vinny up and slammed him down again, and again. "Dante!" Silvio shouted, stepping forward, but he did not intervene. Dante pulled Vinny's head back. The capo's nose was shattered, his mouth a ruin of blood and broken teeth. Dante leaned down, his lips inches from the man's ear, his voice a terrifying, quiet hiss that carried to every corner of the room. "She's not a pet," Dante said. "She's not a rumor, and she's certainly not damaged goods." He shoved Vinny's face back into the table and turned to the rest of the room. His chest was heaving, his eyes wild and lethal. He pointed a blood-stained finger at Elena, who sat perfectly still, her posture regal amidst the violence. "This woman," Dante roared, "is Elena Moretti. She's my wife. She's under my name. She's under my protection. Anyone who disrespects her disrespects me. Anyone who questions her place at this table questions my authority." He scanned the faces of the shocked men. "Does anyone else have something to say?" Silence. Absolute, terrified silence. "Good." Dante straightened his jacket. "Get this trash out of my sight." That night, the adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a hollow ache. The snow was falling heavily now, blanketing the city in white silence. Elena sat on the balcony of the master bedroom. She was wearing one of Dante's white dress shirts again, her legs tucked under her on the wicker chair. She held a glass of red wine, watching the snowflakes dissolve into the darkness. The glass door slid open. Dante stepped out. He had showered, scrubbing Vinny's blood from his knuckles, but the memory of the violence still clung to him. He brought a blanket and draped it over her shoulders without a word. He sat in the chair beside her. "You were frightening today," Elena said softly, not looking at him. "I had to be." Dante replied, "Respect is the only currency that matters in that room." "I know." She turned to him. "Thank you." Dante sighed, leaning his head back against the chair. "You should not have seen that. That is the part of me I tried to hide from you for 7 years. I told you, Dante, I do not want half of you. I want all of you." She took a sip of wine, then looked out at the snow-covered garden. If things had been different, if we had met in a coffee shop or a library, what do you think would have happened? Dante looked at her profile, illuminated by the soft light from the bedroom. "I would have stared at you from across the room," he admitted. "I would have been too intimidated to talk to you." Elena smiled. "A small, sad thing. I doubt that. You would have walked over. You would have charmed me. We would have dated for a year. You would have proposed in the spring." "A big church wedding," Dante added, playing along with the fantasy. "My mother would have cried. Your father would have hated me. And then Elena whispered. "We would have had a wedding night, a real one, not a rescue mission, not a secret arrangement to save a life, just two people starting a life together." The silence stretched between them, heavy with the ghosts of the life they never had. "I'm sorry," Dante said, his voice thick with regret. "I stole that from you." Elena set her wine glass down. She stood up, the blanket falling from her shoulders. She took Dante's hand and pulled him to his feet. "Come inside," she said. She led him into the bedroom, while he watched, confused. She moved around the room. She turned off the electric lamps. She took a lighter from the bedside table and began lighting the thick pillar candles she had arranged earlier, on the dresser, on the mantel, on the nightstands. Dozens of tiny flames flickered to life, casting a warm, golden glow that pushed back the shadows. The room smelled of vanilla and beeswax. It felt sacred. Elena turned to him. The candlelight danced in her dark eyes. "No ghosts tonight. Dante," she whispered. "No past, no mafia, no bounty." She walked toward him and began to undo the buttons of his shirt. "Elena," he breathed, his hands coming up to hold her waist. "I want that night," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I want my wedding night. I want to make the vows real. Just us." Dante looked at her, and his heart broke and healed all in the same beat. He realized that she wasn't just offering him her body. She was offering him absolution. She was rewriting their history, turning a tragedy into a love story. "Just us," he agreed. He picked her up and laid her on the bed. This time, there was no frantic desperation, no fear of the future. It was slow. It was deliberate. It was an act of worship. He undressed her slowly, kissing every inch of skin he exposed, murmuring praises in Italian that he hadn't spoken since he was a child. Elena held him, her hands tracing the muscles of his back, the scars that mapped his life. She kissed his mouth, his eyes, the jagged scar on his cheek. When they came together, it was with a profound sense of homecoming. The candlelight flickered over their skin, turning them into living statues of gold and shadow. It was deep, emotional, and overwhelmingly intimate. They moved in a rhythm that felt ancient, a silent pledge of loyalty and love that went deeper than any marriage license. For hours, the world outside ceased to exist. There was only the warmth of the bed, the scent of the candles, and the woman who had walked through hell to find him. The bubble burst the next morning with a knock on the door. It was Silvio again. But this time, he didn't look worried. He looked angry. Dante met him in the hallway, wrapping a robe around himself. "What is it? We got a tip," Silvio said, his voice low. "From one of the kitchen staff. They saw the upstairs steward, Paolo, taking photos of the security rotations on his phone." Dante's eyes went cold. Paolo. A man who had worked for the family for 5 years. A man who served Dante his coffee every morning. "Where is he?" "In the basement," Silvio said. "We have him." Dante didn't dress. He went down to the basement in his robe and slippers, a terrifying figure of domestic vengeance. Elena followed him to the top of the stairs, listening. The interrogation was short. Dante didn't need to touch him. The moment Paolo saw Dante's face, he broke. He was weeping, begging, blabbering about gambling debts and threats to his sister. "The Russos," Paolo sobbed, tied to a chair in the center of the concrete room. "They threatened to kill her. I had no choice." "There is always a choice," Dante said icily. "Tell me what you gave them." "The schedule," Paolo stammered. "For the Christmas charity gala tomorrow night, they know you are going. They know she is going." Dante went still. The charity gala. It was the biggest social event of the season. Every politician, judge, and businessman in the city would be there. It was neutral ground, usually. "What is the plan?" Dante asked. "A hit," Paolo whispered. "During the speech, they are going to hit the stage. They want to make an example. They want to kill you both in front of the cameras." Dante turned and walked out of the room. "Silvio, deal with him." He met Elena at the top of the stairs. She had heard everything. Her face was pale, but her jaw was set. "We have to cancel," Dante said, brushing past her toward the study. "We are not going to the gala. It is a trap. If we cancel, Elena said, following him. They will just try again. They will hit the house. They will hit the club. Innocent people will get hurt. I do not care about innocent people. Dante spun around. I care about you. Dante, stop! Elena grabbed his arm. This is it. This is the mistake they made. They revealed their hand. She looked up at him, her eyes burning with a dangerous idea. They are expecting us to be surprised, she said. They are expecting targets. Let's give them targets. Dante realized what she was suggesting, and the blood drained from his face. No, absolutely not. I will be the bait, she said. I will wear the red dress. I will stand on that stage next to you. We draw them out. We let them think they have the shot. Are you insane? Dante shouted. I'm not using my wife as a lure for a hit squad. It is the only way to end this. Dante, she argued. The Russo boss will be there, watching. I know he will. He wants to see me die. If we draw him out, your men can end the war in one night. It is too dangerous. Dante paced the room, his hands shaking. One stray bullet, one mistake. I cannot risk it. You risk it every day, Elena said softly. She walked over to him and placed her hands on his face, forcing him to look at her. You said you would burn the city to the ground for me. Well, here's the match. Dante looked at her. He saw the resolve in her eyes. She wasn't asking for permission. She was offering a partnership. She was stepping into the fire with him. He let out a shuddering breath, his forehead resting against hers. The fear was a physical weight in his gut, a nausea that wouldn't go away. If something happens to you, he whispered, his voice cracking, if even a scratch gets on you, I will not stop. I will drown this city in blood. I will kill every single person who shares the name Russo. Elena smiled, a sad, brave smile. She kissed him slowly, tasting the salt of his fear. Then you better protect your wife, she whispered. Dante pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight it hurt. Outside, the snow continued to fall, white and innocent, masking the violence that was coming. The wedding night was over. The war had arrived. The Grand Metropolitan Hotel was a monolith of Gilded Age architecture, a palace of marble and crystal that served as the neutral ground for the city's elite. Tonight, it was the host of the annual Winter Charity Gala. The air outside was biting cold, but inside, the ballroom was a humid terrarium of expensive perfume, champagne, and hypocrisy. Senators rubbed elbows with cartel money launderers. Judges drank with men they had acquitted on technicalities. At the top of the grand staircase, the crowd parted. Dante Moretti stood there, a figure cut from midnight cloth and menace. His tuxedo fit him like a second skin, tailored to conceal the shoulder holster beneath his left arm. He looked every inch the king of the underworld, his face set in a mask of bored arrogance. But no one was looking at Dante. They were looking at the woman on his arm. Elena Moretti wore a gown of crimson silk that seemed to pour over her body like liquid fire. It was backless, daring, and undeniably dangerous. The color was a declaration of war in a sea of black tuxedos and pastel evening gowns. Her dark hair was swept up, revealing the long, elegant line of her neck, a neck that currently bore a diamond necklace worth more than the entire building. Breathe, Dante murmured, his voice barely audible over the swell of the string quartet. His hand was firm on her lower back, his thumb tracing a small, possessive circle against the silk. I am breathing, Elena whispered back, her smile fixed and radiant. Are they here? Everyone is here, Dante replied, his eyes scanning the perimeter, counting exits, counting guards, counting threats. Keep moving. Do not stop for anyone. They descended the stairs. The silence that followed them was heavy, filled with the whispers of 1,000 gossips, the mafia bride, the woman with the bounty on her head. She was walking into the lion's den wearing the color of fresh blood. They moved through the crowd like a shark moving through a school of fish. Elena played her part with terrifying perfection. When a corrupt city councilman approached, sweating and stammering, she charmed him with a laugh that sounded like silver bells. When the wife of a rival captain offered a backhanded compliment about her dress, Elena returned it with a smile so sweet it could rot teeth. Mrs. Moretti, A gravelly voice interrupted them near the ice sculpture. Dante stiffened. It was Don Calabrese, the head of the oldest family in the state. He was an ancient, withered man in a wheelchair, but his eyes were sharp as flint. He had remained neutral in the conflict with the Russos, but neutrality was often just a waiting game for the winning side. Don Calabrese, Elena said, inclining her head with the grace of a duchess. She extended her hand. The old man took it, his dry, papery fingers squeezing hers. "You have courage, child, wearing red to a funeral. It is not a funeral yet. Don Calabrese," Elena replied, her voice steady, "and I prefer to think of it as a celebration of survival." The old man cackled, a dry, wheezing sound. "Survival, a fleeting thing. Tell your husband to watch the rooftops. It is going to snow soon tonight." Dante stepped between them, his body a wall. "Enjoy the evening, old man." He steered Elena away, his grip tightening. That was a warning. "I know," Elena said, her pulse hammering against her ribs. "Is everything in place? Marco is by the kitchen. Silvio has the exits. If anything happens—" "Dante," she squeezed his arm. "Look at me. I am right here." They reached the center of the room just as the mayor took the stage to begin the speeches. The lights dimmed, casting the ballroom into a twilight of shadows and spotlight. The applause was polite, muffled. Dante felt it before he heard it. A shift in the air pressure. A vibration in the floor. His eyes snapped up to the high glass atrium ceiling. A shadow moved across the skylight. "Get down!" Dante roared. He did not wait. He grabbed Elena by the waist and threw her to the marble floor, hurling his own body over hers just as the glass above them shattered. Crack-thum! The sound was not a gunshot. It was an explosion of automatic fire. Chaos erupted. The ballroom transformed from a polite society gathering into a slaughterhouse of panic. Screams tore through the air as guests scrambled over each other, knocking over tables and shattering crystals. Debris and bullets rained down from the catwalks above. Dante pressed Elena into the cold floor, covering her head with his hands, his body forming a human shield. He could feel the impact of glass shards hitting his tuxedo jacket, the heat of bullets chipping the marble inches from his face. "Stay down!" he screamed into her ear. "Dante!" she cried out, her voice lost in the cacophony. Silvio and Marco were already returning fire. The Moretti security team, disguised as waiters, pulled submachine guns from serving trays and unleashed a torrent of lead toward the ceiling. The noise was deafening, a continuous rolling thunder of violence. Dante pulled his own weapon. He rolled onto his back, keeping Elena tucked behind him, and fired 3 shots at a figure rappelling down a rope from the skylight. The figure jerked and plummeted 50 feet to the floor with a sickening thud. "Move! Now!" Dante grabbed Elena's hand. They scrambled to their feet, crouching low. The room was filled with smoke and the acrid smell of cordite. "The kitchen!" Dante commanded, dragging her through the hysteria. A man in a ski mask stepped out from behind a pillar, raising a shotgun. Elena saw him first. "Left!" she screamed. Dante spun, firing twice. The attacker dropped, but as he fell, his finger tightened on the trigger. The shotgun blasted, blowing a hole in a nearby ice sculpture and sending a spray of razor-sharp fragments into the air. Elena stumbled, a sharp gasp escaping her lips. "Elena!" Dante caught her before she fell. "I'm fine!" she yelled, breathless. "Keep moving!" They burst through the swinging doors of the kitchen. It was a pandemonium of fleeing chefs and crashing pans. Marco was there, holding the back exit open, his face streaked with soot. "The car is here," Marco shouted. "The shooters are pinned down on the roof, but we have to go." They sprinted into the freezing alleyway. The armored sedan was waiting, engine roaring. Dante practically threw Elena into the back seat and dove in after her. "Go, go, go!" Dante slammed the partition shut. The car screeched away, tires smoking on the icy asphalt, leaving the wail of sirens and the echo of gunfire behind them. The drive back to the estate was a blur of speed and adrenaline. Dante was on the phone, barking orders, organizing the counterstrike, demanding a body count. Elena sat quietly in the corner of the leather seat, her hand pressed tightly against her upper left arm. When they finally pulled into the garage of the mansion, the silence of the safety felt heavier than the noise of the battle. Dante hung up the phone. He turned to her, his eyes wild, scanning her for damage. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his voice shaking. "Did they touch you?" "I'm fine." "Dante," she said, her voice surprisingly calm. "Just shaken." "Let me see." He reached for her. When she pulled her hand away from her arm, his heart stopped. Her palm was coated in bright, sticky crimson. The sleeve of her red dress was darker, saturated with blood that was not part of the design. "Elena!" Dante gasped, the color draining from his face. "It is just a graze," she insisted, though she swayed slightly. "From the shotgun debris, or the glass. It is not deep." Dante did not hear her. He kicked the car door open and scooped her into his arms, carrying her into the house like she was dying. He shouted for the medic, for hot water, for anything, his voice cracking with panic. 30 minutes later, the chaos had subsided into a hush. They were in the master bathroom. The medic had come and gone, cleaning and bandaging the wound. It was, as Elena had said, a graze, a jagged cut from flying debris, painful but not life-threatening. A stark white bandage now wrapped around her upper arm, standing out against her skin. Elena sat on the edge of the massive bathtub, wearing only a silk slip. Dante stood by the sink, his tuxedo jacket discarded, his white shirt stained with her blood. He was gripping the porcelain edge of the sink so hard his knuckles were white. He was staring at the blood on his hands. Her blood. He was shaking. Elena watched him. She saw the tremors starting in his shoulders. She saw the way his breath was hitching, shallow and ragged. "Dante," she whispered. He made a sound, a choked, broken noise, and then he crumbled. The king of the city, the man who had beaten a capo bloody on a conference table, sank to the floor. He pulled his knees to his chest and buried his face in his hands, and he wept. It was not a silent, stoic weeping. It was ugly, raw, guttural sobbing. It was the sound of a dam breaking after 20 years of holding back the flood. It was the terror of the boy who had lost his family, and the man who had almost lost his wife. Elena slid off the tub. She knelt on the cold tiles in front of him. She did not say a word. She simply wrapped her arms around his shaking frame and pulled his head against her chest. He clung to her. He gripped her waist with desperate strength, burying his face in the curve of her neck, soaking her skin with his tears. "I almost lost you," he choked out, his voice wrecked. "I saw the blood. I thought I had failed." "You didn't fail," Elena soothed, running her fingers through his dark, sweat-dampened hair. "I am here. I am alive. I cannot do this," he sobbed, the confession tearing out of him. "I cannot watch you bleed. I'm not strong enough, Elena. I am weak. Look at me." She took his face in her hands. His eyes were red, swollen, filled with a self-hatred so deep it broke her heart. She used her thumbs to wipe the tears from his scarred cheeks. "You are not weak," she said fiercely. "You covered me with your body. You walked into fire for me. That is not weakness. Dante, that is love." She pressed her forehead against his. "Now do you see?" she whispered. "We are already married by heart, blood and fire. That is our vow. You cannot scare me away. You cannot protect me by pushing me away. We are in this together." Dante looked at her. Seeing the steel beneath the softness, he saw the bandage on her arm, the proof of her courage. He let out a long, shuddering breath and leaned into her touch, surrendering. Later that night. The bedroom was dark, save for the moonlight filtering through the bulletproof glass. They lay in the center of the bed, skin against skin. There was no frantic energy tonight, no desperate hunger. What happened between them was slow, quiet, and achingly tender. Dante moved over her with a reverence that bordered on religion. He was terrified of hurting her arm, so he kept his weight on his elbows, his movements fluid and gentle. He kissed her face, tasting the salt of her tears and his own. "I love you," he whispered against her lips, saying the words for the first time. "I love you so much it destroys me." "I love you," Elena whispered back, her hands resting on his shoulders, anchoring him. They made love slowly, every movement a reassurance, every touch a silent apology and a promise. It was a communion of grief and relief. Elena cried silently, tears slipping down her temples into her hair, overwhelmed by the intensity of his emotion. Dante's face was wet, too, his guard completely stripped away. When it was over, he did not roll away. He collapsed onto his chest beside her, pulling her into the cradle of his arm, careful of her bandage. He held her as if she were made of mist and might evaporate with the dawn. Morning brought the cold light of reality. Dante was awake before the sun. He had not slept. He lay watching the rise and fall of Elena's chest, needing the visual confirmation that she was still breathing. A soft knock on the door made him flinch. He extricated himself carefully from Elena's grasp, covering her with the duvet. He pulled on pants and a fresh shirt, his movements stiff. He walked out into the hallway, closing the door silently behind him. Silvio was waiting. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. His eyes were dark hollows. "We found the shooter on the roof," Silvio said without preamble. "He was alive. Barely. Marco had a conversation with him before he expired." Dante leaned against the wall, crossing his arms. His face was back to stone, but his eyes were colder than ice. "And? He gave us a name," Silvio said. "The man pulling the strings, the man running the Russo family now." "Who is it?" Dante asked. "Which cousin? Which nephew?" Silvio shook his head slowly. "It is not a Russo by blood. It is an outsider they brought in to restructure the organization, a ghost from the past." Silvio handed Dante a file. Inside was a grainy surveillance photo taken at the airport 3 days ago. Dante looked at the photo. His blood froze in his veins. It was a face he hadn't seen in 7 years. Older, grayer, scarred, but unmistakable. Victor Volkov. Dante whispered the name like a curse. "The trafficker," Silvio confirmed grimly. "The head of the ring you destroyed to get Elena out." "We thought he died in the fire that night." "He survived," Dante said, his voice dropping to a lethal register. "He survived, and he rebuilt. He joined the Russos to get to me. It is not about territory." "Dante," Silvio said. "He's building an army. He has mercenaries coming in from the East Coast. He doesn't just want the city. He wants her," Dante finished. He looked at the closed bedroom door. The man who had put Elena in that shipping container was alive. The man who had haunted her nightmares was in the city. The realization shifted something in Dante's tectonic plates. The fear he had felt last night evaporated, replaced by a cold, crystalline clarity. This was no longer a gang war. This was a reckoning. "Get the men ready," Dante said. His voice was devoid of humanity. "Call in every favor. Empty the accounts. I want every weapon we have on the table." "Are we going to war?" Silvio asked. Dante looked at his right hand, remembering the feel of Elena's blood on his skin. "No," Dante said. "We're going to an execution." He turned back to the door, his hand resting on the handle. He would not run. He would not hide her anymore. He would burn the world down to the bedrock to free her from the chains of the past. "Prepare the cars," Dante ordered. "We finish this tonight." The city of Chicago did not sleep that week. It bled. Dante Moretti did not wait for the enemy to come to his doorstep. He became the storm that broke against their walls in a calculated, brutal offensive. He dismantled the Russo alliance piece by piece. It was surgical warfare. On Tuesday, 3 warehouses storing illegal weapons for Victor Volkov's mercenary army went up in flames, painting the night sky in hues of orange and black. On Wednesday, the dockworkers' union, long pressured by the Russos, flipped their allegiance back to Moretti after a quiet, terrifying conversation with Silvio. The ports were sealed, the supply lines were cut. Dante moved through the city like a phantom, his eyes hollow, his soul focused on a singular purpose: eradication. He barely ate. He barely slept. He was a man possessed by the need to scour the earth clean for the woman waiting at home. But Elena was not waiting. The Moretti estate had transformed into a command center. The grand dining room was covered in maps and satellite imagery. Men with bandaged arms and grim faces moved through the halls. and in the center of it all was Elena. She refused to be sequestered in the safe room. When a young soldier came in with a bullet graze to his shoulder, it was Elena who cut away the fabric and poured alcohol over the wound, her hands steady while he hissed in pain. When the logistics of moving ammunition across the city became a snarled mess, it was Elena who reorganized the delivery routes, using her knowledge of the city's grid to bypass police checkpoints. Dante found her in the armory late one night. She was loading magazines for Glock 17 handguns, her fingers stained with gun oil. The metallic click, click, click was the only sound in the room. "You should not be touching those," Dante said, leaning against the doorframe. He looked exhausted, his tie undone, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal bruised knuckles. "I am making myself useful," Elena replied without looking up. She slid another round into the chamber. "Silvio said you are short on hands." Dante crossed the room in 3 long strides and covered her hands with his own, stopping her movements. "I want you to leave. Elena, the plane is still on standby. This ends tonight. I am going for the head of the snake. If you fail, I am dead anyway," she interrupted, looking up at him. Her eyes were dry and fierce. "Do you still not get it, Dante? There is no version of this story where I leave you. You made me your wife 7 years ago to save me. You gave me a shield. Now let me fight beside you to save you." Dante looked at her. He saw the girl he had rescued. Yes, but he also saw the woman who had walked through fire to find him again. He saw a partner. "I cannot protect you if you are on the front lines," he whispered, his voice rough with fear. "I do not need you to protect me tonight," she said, standing up and holstering the weapon at her hip. "I need you to win, and you fight better when you know what you are fighting for." Dante closed his eyes and pressed his forehead against hers. He breathed her in, the scent of gunpowder and jasmine. It was the scent of his future. If he survived the night, "Stay close to Marco," he conceded, a terrifying weight settling in his chest. "If I give the order to run, you run. Do you understand?" "I understand," she lied. Viktor Volkov's compound was a fortress of concrete and steel located in the industrial wasteland south of the city. It was an old meatpacking plant, repurposed for a different kind of butchery. The snow was falling in thick, blinding sheets when Dante's convoy arrived. They cut the power grid at midnight, plunging the compound into darkness. Then, they breached the perimeter. The firefight was instantaneous and deafening. Dante led the charge. He moved through the courtyard with lethal precision, his weapon flashing in the dark. He was not fighting for territory, he was fighting a ghost. He cut through Volkov's mercenaries like a scythe through wheat, driven by a cold, black rage. Elena was supposed to be in the rear armored vehicle with Marco, but when the first explosion rocked the compound gate, chaos swallowed the plan. Marco was pinned down by sniper fire from a guard tower. In the confusion, Elena slipped away. She moved through the shadows, her black coat rendering her nearly invisible against the industrial gloom. She held her weapon with both hands, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She was terrified, but the terror was distant, muffled by a singular, driving need. Find Dante. She tracked the sound of the heaviest fighting. Inside the main factory floor, the air was thick with smoke and the copper tang of blood. Dante was pinned down behind a rusted conveyor belt. 3 mercenaries were advancing on his position, their assault rifles chewing up the metal cover. Dante checked his magazine. Empty. He reached for his spare, but his tactical vest was snagged on a piece of rebar. He cursed, yanking at it. The footsteps were getting closer. He could hear their boots crunching on the glass-strewn floor. One of the mercenaries flanked him, raising his rifle to fire a kill shot into Dante's exposed side. Dante saw the movement too late. He braced himself for the impact. Crack! A single shot rang out, distinct and sharp over the roar of the battle. The mercenary's head snapped back, and he crumpled to the floor. Dante spun around, up on the metal catwalk. 20 feet above, a figure stood amidst the shadows. Elena lowered her weapon, her face pale but her eyes locked on his. "Move!" she screamed. Dante did not hesitate. He He ripped his vest free, reloaded, and vaulted over the conveyor belt, taking out the remaining 2 stunned attackers. He looked up at the catwalk. "I told you to stay in the car," he roared, though his voice was thick with relief. "You are welcome," she shouted back. They pushed forward, clearing the factory floor room by room, until they reached the heavy steel doors of the administrative office. This was it, the center of the web. Dante kicked the door open. Viktor Volkov was waiting. The Russian was huge, a bear of a man with a shaved head and a face that looked like a roadmap of violence. He stood behind a heavy desk, holding a glass of vodka. He did not look afraid. He looked amused. "Dante Moretti," Viktor boomed, his voice like grinding stones. "And the little bird, you brought her back to me." Dante holstered his gun. He wanted to feel this. He wanted to feel bones break. "She is not a bird. Viktor," Dante said, walking forward, his hands balling into fists. "And she is not yours." Viktor laughed and drew a knife from his belt, a long, serrated blade. "I broke her once. I will break her again, and then I will break you." He lunged. The fight was brutal and ugly. Viktor was strong, but Dante was younger and fueled by 7 years of hatred. They crashed into the desk, shattering it. Viktor slashed at Dante's face, reopening the old scar, sending a stream of blood down his cheek. Dante didn't even blink. He caught Viktor's wrist, twisting it with a sickening crunch, and drove his knee into the man's ribs. Viktor wheezed, stumbling back. Dante was on him instantly. He rained blows down on the Russian's face, unleashing every ounce of rage he had carried since the night he found Elena in that container. He hit him for the lost years. He hit him for the fear in her eyes. He hit him for the bounty. Dante struck him until Viktor fell and did not get up. The Russian lay on the floor, battered, breathing in shallow, wet gasps. Dante stood over him, chest heaving, his knuckles raw. He reached for his gun to finish it. "No," a voice said. Dante stopped. Elena stepped into the room. She walked past Dante, her movements calm, almost dreamlike. She looked down at the man who had haunted her nightmares, the monster under her bed. Viktor looked up at her through one swollen eye. He tried to sneer, but it came out as a bloody cough. "You—" Elena stared at him. There was no fear in her face anymore. The trembling girl was gone. In her place stood the matriarch of a criminal empire. "You forgot me," she said softly. Her voice was cold, devoid of pity. "You thought I was just cargo. Just a number, but I never forgot you. Viktor, I remembered your face every night for 7 years. I remembered it so I would know where to aim." She raised her pistol. Her hand was rock steady. "Elena," Dante warned softly, "once you do this—" "I know," she said. "It is finished." She pulled the trigger. The sound was final. The echo bounced off the concrete walls, ringing in the sudden silence. Elena holstered the gun. She did not look away from the body. She took a deep breath, and for the first time in 7 years, her lungs filled completely. The weight was gone. Dante walked to her. He did not touch her at first. He waited until she turned to him. When she did, he saw tears in her eyes, not of trauma, but of release. "Let's go home," she whispered. Dante took her hand. "Burn it?" They walked out of the office. Silvio and Marco were waiting with canisters of gasoline. They doused the factory floor, the offices, and the records of human misery that Viktor had kept. As they walked out into the snowy courtyard, Dante struck a match. He flicked it behind him without looking back. The roar of the ignition was satisfying. Flames engulfed the building, eating the darkness, turning the night into day. They walked away from the inferno, hand in hand, the snow melting around them from the heat of the fire. Behind them, the structure collapsed, burying the past in ash and rubble. 3 days later, Christmas Eve, the Moretti estate was quiet. The guards were still posted, but the tension was gone. The bounty had been lifted the moment news of Viktor's death hit the wires. The other families had retreated, acknowledging the new undisputed king of the city. But inside the penthouse, there was no talk of business. Elena stood in front of the full-length mirror in the bedroom. She was holding a dress against her body. It was not a designer gown. It was a simple, white, vintage dress made of lace and silk, the kind of dress a young girl might buy at a thrift store and dream of wearing. She had bought it years ago, hidden in the back of her closet in the foster home. Dante walked in, fastening the cufflinks on his tuxedo. He stopped when he saw her. "You kept it," he said, his voice thick. "I bought it when I was 18, she said, smoothing the lace. "I told myself that one day. I would wear it for a man who loved me. Not for a certificate, not for protection, for love." Dante walked over to her. He placed his hands on her shoulders, looking at their reflection. The bruises on his face were fading, but the love in his eyes was brighter than ever. "Are you sure?" he asked. "We are already married on paper." "Paper burns," Elena said, turning to face him. "This time, it is real." They held the ceremony on the rooftop of the tallest building in the city, the one Dante owned. There was no priest, just Silvio, Marco, and a few of the loyal staff who had become family. The sun was setting, painting the skyline in gold and violet. The wind whipped Elena's hair, but she didn't feel the cold. They exchanged vows they wrote themselves. There were no promises of obedience or safety. They promised loyalty. They promised to be partners in the fire. They promised that no matter how dark the world got, they would be the light for each other. When Dante kissed her, it wasn't the desperate kiss of a man afraid to lose her. It was the solid, claiming kiss of a husband who knew he had found his equal. The final scene unfolded on Christmas morning. The sun poured through the sheer curtains of the master bedroom, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The room was warm, safe, and quiet. Elena woke first. She lay on her side, watching Dante sleep. His face was relaxed, the lines of worry smoothed out by rest. He looked younger. He looked free. She reached out and traced the line of his jaw, her fingers brushing over the faint stubble. Dante stirred. His eyes opened, blinking against the light. When they focused on her, a slow, lazy smile spread across his face. He reached out and pulled her closer, tucking her head under his chin. "Merry Christmas, Mrs. Moretti," he rumbled, his voice jagged with sleep. Elena smiled, resting her hand over his heart. She could feel it beating, strong, steady, and hers. "Do you remember me now, Mafia boss?" she teased softly, echoing the words she had spoken in the club what felt like a lifetime ago. Dante laughed, a rich, genuine sound that filled the room. He rolled over, hovering above her, looking down at her with an expression of absolute adoration. "Remember you?" he whispered, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "Elena, you are the ink in my skin. You are the breath in my lungs." He kissed her nose, then her lips. "How could I ever forget my wife? Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed the journey of Dante and Elena as much as I enjoyed writing it. It was a roller coaster of emotion, danger, and redemption. I would love to hear from you in the comments. Where are you listening from today? Did you think Dante did the right thing by trying to send her away? Or was Elena right to stay and fight? Let me know your thoughts in English below. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to the Mafia Romance Stories channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new episode. We have many more dark, romantic, and thrilling tales coming your way soon. Until next time, stay safe and keep believing in love.